Are you one of those many players who lose their posture during the swing, early extend, swing the club back on the wrong path, particularly inside on the backswing, which is really common? So much of it can come down to what's happening at the hip area, both at address and then during the swing. And today we're going to have a look at how we can set that up properly, or address it. I should say, I was trying to pardon the pun, because address is part of the issue here. When I take correct position at address, if you have a look, you can see from side on here, my belt line's relatively level. When I tilt forward, and this is really, really common, you'll see that as I set up to the ball, my belt line is still relatively horizontal. And that's where the trouble starts. And you'll notice that when I do that, the only way that I can reach the ball if my pelvis is still horizontal, or my belt line is still horizontal, is by rounding my back. And then we see what the majority of golfers do. So how do we go about addressing that? Well, the first thing is to learn to tilt forward from the hips rather than tilting forward from the center of the body. So a really old school drill to do this, and it will give you the feeling of exaggerating the posture a little bit, but really helpful. If I turn side on to the camera, I'm going to put the grip of the club against my head, and the bottom of the grip, which is I'm holding on to, so the shaft is either touching my belt or my fingers are touching my belt, which they are. Now I've also got contact in the middle of my back. Now when I tilt forward, as you can see, as I start to tilt forward, I've actually lost contact at both my head and my lower back. And if I'm rounding, that will be really, really common. So what I want to do is I want to retain contact on all 3 points, both my head, middle of my back, and lower back. So from here, as I tilt forward, you'll see as soon as I begin to tilt, my belt goes with it. So my hips are now tilting forward. And if I tilt forward to about here, I can feel a bit of a stretch through my hamstrings, but now if I unlock my hamstrings, now most of that stretch is gone. Now if you've habitually tilted forward, legs bent, maybe bent too much, and upper body rounded, you won't feel quite the same stretch through your backside and through your hamstrings. So when you do feel a little bit of that stretch, it shouldn't be uncomfortable. It's only a small stretch, so it shouldn't be anything that you can't do. You should be able to do that quite easily. You find it will feel a little bit different though. Okay, so now that we've established good tilt, good posture at address, what we need to do is maintain it. So when I set myself up here, same as what I just spoke about with getting that tilt, that's around about 20 degrees. When I swing the club back to the top of the swing, even though my hips have rotated, I've still got that same bend. And then as I swing back towards the ball, I will lose the bend a little bit as I'm coming into impact, but I'm looking to avoid my hips becoming level or even like going slightly the other way. So what I need to do is start to feel how I'm able to control this center or this hip pelvis tilt as I swing the club. So a couple of things that I can do to start with. First of all, if I tilt forward, as I swing the club back and through, my hips are going to rotate, my knees will flex. So from the start, all I'm going to do is like a small squat. Now, if I can do that small squat, I'm starting to learn to isolate the movement now at my hip, my knee, and my ankle without compromising my hip tilt. So that's not changing as I do that movement. From here, I'm going to not turn my hips much initially, but can I start to rotate my upper body so that I'm retaining the upper body forward tilt as I turn. So I'm turning my upper body and still retaining that hip tilt. Now I'm going to allow my hips to just start to move and see if there's a point where I start to suddenly lose that forward tilt with my hips. Now ideally I won't. So as I go back, hips are tilted forward, rotate my upper body, and my hips are still retaining that forward tilt at the same time. Now, a slightly more challenging movement is that if I set my feet, I'm just going to do very, very light steps on each foot. Now I'm going to start to look to rotate my body as I'm keeping that tilting movement going and rotating the other way. Now, the whole idea behind doing exercises like that is so that I can dissociate the movement between my upper body and my pelvis. It just means to separate them out. So once I've got the sensation of doing that, then I need to consider what my arms are doing. Now, if I just hold the club in front of me, and now from here, body's tilted forward, hips are tilted forward, and as I move my club back and through, I'm getting this swinging movement with my arms. Now, when I'm moving the club here, notice how the club is going back and it's not moving around behind my body. It's actually moving back pretty straight. And as I'm moving, creating this motion, I'm focusing on keeping my hips tilted forward as they're rotating. If I make a movement holding the club now, body's tilted forward, and now I'm creating this motion. Again, it's a lot less than a full swing, but I'm learning to create that turning movement without my hips changing. Then I can progress to hitting shots. So my first shot might be to keep my arms soft. I've got this feeling of keeping the pelvis steady, and then as I create the motion, just with a little swing, I'm looking to get the feeling of rotating that pelvis. Now, when I create that movement, as soon as I start to get to a certain point where I'm trying to put full force into it, if my hips have been becoming more level as I've gone through, it's likely to revert back to that. So I'm going to continue doing the smaller swings, then build them up and see if I can retain that form. As you get used to retaining this feel of the correct movement, you will start to be able to make bigger and bigger swings. Like I said at the start, it's quite normal as you get close to impact to lose a little bit of that tilt anyway. But let's make a full swing, and let's see if we can retain that tilt through the full swing. So I've moved my body back and through. I've got this feeling of movement through my hips, but not this sudden tension through the front of my body that's going to tilt my hips up. It will take a little bit of control and practice to get the feeling of it, but when you are able to retain that forward tilt, go through those exercises that I mentioned in the video there, then you'll start to gain more and more control over those shots. Build up from the smaller swings to the longer swings, and you'll find that all of those shots where you're standing up taller will start to go away.